Hey everyone, welcome to the Sunday Sit Down, where it's not Sunday, but we are sitting down. We are hoping, however this finds you, that this is a great resource as we reflect on our sermon from the past week, as we get a chance to go a little deeper, to look at the text in a more granular way, to explore some of the application in a more specific way, perhaps. And so that's what we're hoping to do this morning. And so we turn the page. We are in Luke chapter 9. And this is the story of Jesus sort of looking at his disciples and Jesus has been doing lots of things. I kind of went through every single event that Jesus has done thus far. And we noted that it was Jesus doing all the work. And so now Jesus says to his 12 disciples, he says, okay, you go do. And he sends them off in in a missionary journey to the region. He says, don't take anything with you. Well, we'll read it in a second. But anyway, so this is an interesting passage on a couple different levels. And so we had one question in particular come up that was quite provocative in a great way. And so Abby and I are looking forward to discussing a little bit more, but maybe why don't you start by reading the passage for me?
All right. Luke chapter 9, verses 1-9. When Jesus had called the 12 together, he gave them power and authority to drive out all demons and to cure diseases. And he sent them out to proclaim the kingdom of God and to heal the sick. He told them, take nothing for the journey. No staff, no bag, no bread, no money, no extra shirt. Whatever house you enter, stay there until you leave that town. If people do not welcome you, leave their town and shake the dust off your feet as a testimony against them. So they set out and went from village to village, proclaiming the good news and healing people everywhere. Now Herod the Tetrarch heard about all that was going on, and he was perplexed because some were saying that John had been raised from the dead, others that Elijah had appeared, and still others that one of the prophets of long ago had come back to life. But Herod said, I beheaded John. Who then is this I hear such things about? And he tried to see him.
All right. And then in my message, I did include just the very beginning of verse 10. We don't need to worry about reading that now. It was just because it kind of connects with this idea of the apostles returning back to report back to Jesus what they had seen and heard and done. So, yeah, I don't know where you want to jump in first here, Abby, but, we can keep this a little bit more discussion oriented rather than, you grilling me on things. Because I think you have some good insights as well. So, yeah.
This passage is super interesting to me because when I read it in the Bible, it's like, okay, start of a new chapter, and it almost feels like just out of nowhere. Like we don't really have a sense other than that the disciples were following Jesus, who was a rabbi. So eventually, like, they are learning to become like Jesus. But it really almost feels out of left field that Jesus is all of a sudden like, all right, you guys are up.
Throw them into the deep end.
Yeah, it really is I hope you've figured out how to swim. Especially, I think for me, like when I'm teaching other people to do this, I am come alongside and do this with me. Mm-hmm. Whereas Jesus very much has a watch how I do this. And then he sends them out on their own. It's not like he's going with them to give them tips along the way. Yeah. It's I really hope that as you've watched me, you've figured this out. And that's a lot of responsibility to give to people, on top of the fact that he also calls them together and says, here, I've given you the power and authority to drive out all demons and cure diseases.
Well, and one of the things that struck me is that they probably have been like discussing, like you see it in like the parable of the sower, where Jesus gives this parable, and then they kind of like have a little huddle and they're talking about it, right? So I think it's fair to assume that they've been probably doing that a little bit along the way, but it's just so funny that like it's all of, Jesus has been doing all these things and he's just like, okay, trial by fire, go. And I wonder if this is purely speculation. There is so this is just musing. This is not me inferring anything from the text. I want to make that very clear. You have to imagine that they must have failed a lot along the way.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah, it is like, I mean, like, I don't remember which gospel it is, but there is examples of they're like, Jesus, we can't heal this person.
Yes.
We can't get this demon
why
out.
couldn't we do it, Jesus?
Why couldn't we do it? Especially so they knew that they theoretically had the power to do all of this. But there isn't a lot in the gospel accounts of the failures. And I think sometimes that gives us a false perception. I think that's maybe where you were talking on Sunday about, is this descriptive or prescriptive? And I think this is maybe one of the areas where sometimes we mix those up because we assume that we have to be successful all the time, or we misunderstand what success in our evangelism looks like as we carry the good news of the kingdom of God. And to heal the sick, like, what does healing actually look like? And so we think that it, has to look a certain way.
Yeah.
And maybe it doesn't.
Well, and one of the wrestlings that I had as I was going through this passage is you see the example or the instructions that Jesus gives. Don't take anything with you. Stay at the house that you're told. Go and heal. Go and drive out demons. And if people don't welcome you, shake off the dust off your feet as a testimony against them. So he gives these very specific instructions. And I get worried sometimes that we
use it as an excuse for bad stewardship.
Well, that yes, but also just that we can take Jesus's words and his instructions and interpret that this is the way that we must do evangelistic work or mission work, that this is the only way to do it. When Jesus throughout his ministry gives, and Paul as well, gives a ton of different ways in which this is done, right? Yeah. This is one example.
Yep. Most of the early church leaders were like bivocational.
Yeah.
They provided for themselves. And like Paul, in at least one of his letters, talks about like, I'm so grateful for the gifts that this church is giving to me, but also like I am able to provide for myself. And that's like, it's important to be responsible, not just with the gospel that we're carrying, but like making sure we have the resources to do that in ways that don't place an unfair, unjust burden on the people we're trying to reach, which I think probably is a little different here, because just like in the climate of that day, I would imagine most of the people that they were taking this to probably would have had a higher economic status just because of the dynamics between like Jews and Gentiles and how that worked out in the Roman Empire. But that's not like blanket universal statement, but it would have been the case in a lot of the places they were visiting.
Well, and the people, the hospitality culture was
so different,
far greater, right? And so that's for me a major consideration, that when we look at these people going from village to village and doing ministry there, and basically knowing that you're going to have a place to stay, right? That there will be people that will see you and welcome you in. I don't know that is a reality if I were to, go to a village or city or town where I don't know a single person. I mean, I seem like hopefully a nice enough dude. Maybe if I shaved my beard, I would have a better chance. I don't know, but like, I'm not guaranteed that.
Yeah.
Whereas I think there was a bit more of a guarantee here, just based on the way that this sort of work was done and happened in the day.
Well, and like the people generally built their lives under the assumption that like hospitality was just what they did and everybody did it. So you make room for that, or you make it work. And that's not something that we're very good at in the 21st century.
We could learn a little something.
We could learn.
Like I'm not saying like just bring any rando into your home. I'm not
No.
suggesting that, listener. However, how can we grow? You know, like how can we grow in our willingness to bring people in when there are needs, or to display a sort of radical generosity in the way that these people would have. And I didn't get into any of this on Sunday, but it's worth exploring a little.
Yeah, I think just like a practical example that I find helpful for that idea of hospitality is that I kind of grew up with people in my family where it was like when they, meal planned and decided what they would have for dinner on the nights of the week that like we as kids had sports events or we had to go to youth group after, the things we made for dinner were really easy to, add an extra can of beans into or to expand. So it didn't, we maybe planned to have 6 or 7 people. If it ended up being 10 people, it wasn't difficult for us to stretch that meal to feed more people. And learning to be like, okay, the house doesn't have to be 100% perfect. Like we want people to just be able to come into our everyday lives and sit around the table with us, even though everybody's in and out and people have places to be at different times in the evening. And it's been really cool to see how that's kind of like shaped the neighborhood that my parents currently live in, is that idea of just, open dinner type situation.
I love that. And I know that there are some folks in the church here who are very adept at that. You know who you are, and I know that you're listening. I want to be better at that. In fact, we're in the middle of my daughter, who she's 9 years old. She'll be 10 early in the new year, and she's starting to. She's starting to become more mature, and so she wants a new room. Her kind of former toy room is going to be kind of retweaked a little bit to become a bit more of like a hangout space for her and her friends. And one of the rationales for my wife and I are like, we want to actually be a safe space. We want our home to be a safe space for kids, where there is like this lost art of what you're describing, of having just like kid turns up after school with your kids and they're hanging out. It's like, hey, do you want to stay for dinner? Let's check with your parents. That's okay. Yeah, we've got lots of food. Don't worry about it. Would love to see more of that.
Yeah.
Would love to, myself, I think earlier on in my life, we were, this is a funny scenario that we found ourselves in. This was 11 years ago. My wife and I, we were away for like our 5-year anniversary, where we were in the UK and France and had a wonderful time. We came home. We were at church that Sunday. There was a woman from Ireland who had turned up at our church. And she just had like moved to Guelph on a whim. No plans, no nothing. We ended up chatting with her, and she was like, well, if you guys know anywhere like I could stay, because I want to be here for like the next year or two, is there anywhere where I can stay? And my wife and I looked at each other. We're like, we got home from church. We're like, I think she's supposed to live in our house. And so like, it was just this real deep sense, and so she did. She actually lived in our house for a year. We were hoping it would be 2. She ended up having to move back after a year, but it was amazing. Like it was such a gift. It was like, a friendship that we still maintain to this day. She was back in Canada last summer. We had her over for lunch, and actually she led worship with me that Sunday. And like just a beautiful thing that like, just being able to listen to that prompting and just say, I think she's actually supposed to live in our basement, and it was awesome. So anyway, that's sort of like an unexpected little tangential part of this passage to think about what the experience of those villages were like. But why don't we get into another area here?
Yeah, like when the people we're going to don't want us to talk to them and tell them about Jesus.
Yeah. So we had a good question from someone. So go ahead.
Yeah. So the question was, Jesus uses this example in Luke 9 of shaking the dust off of your feet. He says, shake the dust off your feet as a testimony against them.
Mm-hmm.
And Justin kind of explained that in that time, it was this like symbolic gesture that marked a location kind of as ceremonially unclean. Mm-hmm. And someone asked kind of what is the modern day equivalent of that? Or like, how do we understand that in our context today? Because we don't have these same ideas of clean and unclean. Mm-hmm. And, you know, generally like creating a testimony against someone is a pretty harsh mark on them. Mm-hmm. And so what do we do, you know, when people are really hostile in response to our faith? Yeah. And how do we move forward with that, whether or not we, you know, continue to kind of like gently walk in relationship with them, or do we kind of just step away from that?
Yeah, there's a lot of different like angles to approach this from. The first one that comes to my mind is, you know, that like, hey, some of this is just boundaries. Like if someone is going to treat you with hostility, someone is going to treat you with aggression, someone is going to treat you and kind of treat you in a condescending way, like at some point we just need to be willing to say, hey, that's not okay. You know, like I deserve better treatment than that. Right. Mm-hmm. So like, that's like a very like superficial approach. That's just kind of good for life in general. But specifically as a Christian ethic, I think about the easiest way, and I've talked about this a few times before on the podcast, but the easiest way that I can sort of like, give an anecdote or example is in like online interactions with people, right? Where, like, okay, so, keyboard warrior atheists are among, there are lots of thoughtful atheists who are, you know, wanting to interact in good faith.
Yeah.
There are many who just want to insult you for believing in Sky Daddy, you know?
Yeah.
Like, and they will do anything in their power to belittle and insult. And one of my favorite things that I regrettably wish I had started doing earlier was just be kind, be loving. Don't retaliate. Because what's going to happen is that anyone who sees that interaction, it's going to be a testimony against them, right? They are the ones that are going to look bad in that scenario, right? Not me. They might belittle my beliefs. They might not even agree with my beliefs. But if you're reading that and be like, wow, that Christian was above reproach in their kindness and their behavior. And also, that atheist kind of looked like a jerk. So I was like, that's another angle. And I think that can play out in real life too. The other part of it that I'm thinking about is like, and we chatted about this a little bit. Sometimes we have a partial job to do when it comes to those who are hostile toward matters of faith, right? Mm-hmm. Like that it is not always going to be my job personally.
Yeah.
To be the one to draw them toward Jesus. Now, as I said on Sunday, this is all grace. We know this is all God's work anyway. Yeah. However, we all have unique roles to play that God works in and through us as individuals.
Yeah.
And so for me, I have learned that it is not always going to be my job to do the thing. That there may be someone like you, someone like Pastor Grant, someone just an everyday congregant who is going to be able to build a connection and maybe break down those barriers. Anyway, yeah.
Paul talks about that in 1 Corinthians. He calls out the Corinthian church on kind of They had a slightly different situation where they were like, oh, I follow Paul, and like this is the apostle I'm choosing to like
Yeah.
align with, or I follow Apollos. And Paul says this thing where he says, okay, I planted the seed, but Apollos watered it, but it is God that has been making it grow. So neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything at all, but only God who makes things grow. The one who plants and the one who waters have one purpose, and they will each be rewarded according to their own labor. For we are co-workers in God's service. I think that kind of sums it up really well, of the we don't know who's going to come along in the future and water what we hope is a seed that's been planted if we have these encounters where ultimately we end up being rejected or mistreated or spoken poorly to because of our faith. And that's very freeing. Like, I don't think that means we've failed in our sharing of what we believe. And it is a really beautiful opportunity, I think, to trust that God is moving and God is working in people way beyond what we can see, and that we might not actually see what comes of that, and learning to be okay with that and trusting that, God loves the people he created, and we can't love them more than God loves them. And it doesn't, I almost think it does the opposite of showing people God loves them when we start to act as though we can love people better than God can, or that we ultimately know how best to love the people God created. And that's okay.
Yeah, I think about, like, if we've been loving, if we've been gracious as much as we are able, if we've been truthful, and again, all that wrapped up in love and grace, because I think that you can be truthful, you can be a jerk about it. If you've been all those things, and there is still hostility, there is still rejection, that's where we can say, like, and this is sort of what I picture the modern day version of shaking the dust off your feet. I just sort of mean, like, okay, I'm just going to wipe my hands clean of this. And I don't mean that in like a callous way.
Yeah.
I just mean that in a way of like, hey, I don't know at this juncture if there's anything more that I can do. This is up to God. This may be up to someone else, God through them. And so it's not something that I think we should spend an inordinate amount of time worrying over, right?
No.
Yeah. And then the other piece that I'm thinking about a little bit is, and it's going to sound like I'm ragging on apologetics, and I've done this a little bit sometimes in my sermons. So I don't want to be like I don't want to be known as like the anti-apologetic guy. But one of the concerns I have is that we think we can debate and argue people into the kingdom of God. And I just have never witnessed that in my life. I think there is time and space for intellectual, theological discourse. Like, I think that can be valuable. And I think that if someone is earnestly seeking and looking for, like, if someone, I have a friend I grew up with who grew up in the church and eventually came to reject it. But they had deeply earnest questions that were like, kind of like apologetic type questions of like, hey, I need you to try to convince me, because I want to believe.
Yeah.
I need you to try to convince me of the resurrection. I need you to try to convince me of the validity of Christianity versus, say, other faiths or whatever. Like, and we had lots of amazing discussions, but they were earnestly seeking. They wanted good faith dialogue. Whereas I see all these videos on YouTube of just like, university lecture halls where you bring in some big speaker. I won't name any names. But and then they're having these debates and they go back and forth. And I mean, like, no one is going to walk away from that feeling like, man, God's spirit was there, and people like
Yep.
repented and they were healed, and the message of the kingdom came out. Like that's not happening there.
No.
Right. And so at some point we need to be able to say, okay, this is not for me. I'm like in all, like I've done everything that is within my power and my control. I leave this up to God.
And I think this idea that the gospel, this good news also like comes with this like addition or byproduct of people being healed. And so often is maybe an exaggeration. There are times where maybe people are proclaiming the good news, but people at minimum are not being healed, and at the worst are being harmed by how it's being portrayed. And like I almost want to say like it's not the full gospel if we're leaving out, like if somehow we're missing the steps that actually provide wholeness, like kind of like Annabelle talked about a couple weeks ago about how this idea of salvation, the word means like wholeness and fullness, and that it like our salvation not only like for our souls in a metaphysical sense, but like every part of us one day will be restored and made whole and perfect again. And I'm not always sure that that's the understanding of the good news that we carry and of the kingdom that we preach, even though that's what was happening. Like maybe it's not physical healing, but maybe it's, you know, the bitterness or the hurt that people have been carrying for years because of what's happened to them. And then they encounter Jesus and that just melts away. Like that is still healing that should be coming with Jesus. And that's so beautiful. And witnessing that, like, it's not like this is an impossible thing. Like it happens. Those of us who follow Jesus have had those experiences where God has done that work. And I think it does people a disservice when we don't want to offer all of that to them as well.
The whole picture of the gospel, right? And that's why Pastor Grant's been doing this too. I think we all have, is that we've been trying to say, look, the kingdom looks like, yes, the proclaiming of the word, but it also looks like healing and restoration and all of these things that Jesus set out when he talked about the kingdom coming in Luke chapter 4. And he is making a very clear statement that these things work in tandem, right? And so I think it's one of the pitfalls of primarily, I want to be careful how I say this, but like primarily just like preaching the gospel, so to speak. And I say that almost in quotation marks because I don't actually think you can preach the gospel without there being works attached to it. Like James is pretty clear on that.
Yeah.
I just pulled up classic James chapter 2. It says, "What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, 'Go in peace, keep warm and well fed,' but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself is not accompanied by, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead." And that is that's a pretty intense statement that, Christians over the centuries have hotly debated about the implications of that.
Yeah.
But I think we can make it too complicated. It's that the kingdom, if it is, you can't dissect the kingdom in terms of here's sort of like the gospel proclamation part, and here's we're going to help you be healed and restored and be fed and clothed and all that. Those two cannot be compartmentalized.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that almost more than there's this part and we need to see it with this part. It's like they're just so interlocked. They it is one package. And if, you're not seeing all of those pieces, it's probably a different package altogether.
Yes.
Or on the other hand, though, I think sometimes we're too quick to be like harsh in our judgment of, you must be a heretic because I'm not seeing XYZ fruit, or you must be preaching a false gospel. And I think sometimes like God does work behind the scenes and we can't always see the full picture of what's going on. My last year working at camp, our like our thing for the summer was that we see a part and God sees the whole. So we would go like this, we see a part, but God sees the whole, because it's like, peripheral vision. I think about that a lot, especially with things like this, of I only have a limited vision.
Yeah.
I cannot and do not want the responsibility of seeing all that God sees. That is a grace.
Yeah, no, thank you.
No, I'm good. I'm good.
Yeah.
But I need to be kept humble and remember that it's not my job to see everything or to know everything or to do everything.
Well, and that raises a good point as well of like, let's even just use the example of myself and Pastor Grant, where Grant is the lead pastor. I am the pastor of worship and outreach. Within that, Grant has a greater responsibility for the word, right? For the written and spoken proclamation of the gospel, right? That is, it's not to say he doesn't care about the other stuff. I know he deeply does. And it's not to say I don't care about the gospel proclamation piece as well. I definitely do. I hope I did that on Sunday, right? But that we both have strengths and bents and emphases. And this is why in the kingdom we need each other because we are all wired differently and God has gifted us differently. And so, for someone like Grant, he is so, I'm going to brag on him for just a moment because he's on vacation right now. So he's not here to hear it anyway, but like, he's so quick on his feet. It'll be like Wednesday and he'll be like, yeah, I've written the sermon in my head. I'll be like, how did you do that? Like, he's like, yeah, I could get up and preach it now. And I'd be like, but you haven't written it. He's like, I know, but that's the last thing I do. And I was like, I got to write it, but like first, and then just our process is so different, and God is uniquely gifted in him in a very particular way that he has not gifted me in. And I think the vice versa, right? That there are strengths and bents that I have that complement, right? And I think that we need each other. We need each other. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think that also, like, sometimes, this would happen like when I was at camp a lot, where we would have, kind of notice that there was a camper who had certain questions or like wrestlings, and you very quickly recognize that like, you're not the person like for this job. But we had this just kind of well-worked system of being like, okay, I know this other person has had experiences that might better resonate or just be able to communicate this with less intensity or more intensity, depending on like the kid and their personality, and to be just okay to hand that off to each other or like work together in that process so that people can come to know Jesus. And that doesn't mean we've done something wrong or that we have failed. And it's, better to work as a team. It is just, it's more fun, and it,
well, and it's good. It's good when we know ourselves.
Yeah.
It's a good thing. Right. And even, for us as individuals and for us as a church, because when we look at the scope across even just our city, there are churches that are going to have greater strengths in different ways, right? And the way that we interact with one another should be, like I hope, and I think I've actually done this before with people, is I've been someone, if they're newer to town or whatever, and they're like looking at churches, we're like, look, hey, here's who we are as a church.
Yeah.
Here's who I am as a pastor. Here's who Grant is as a pastor. Here's what we bring to the table. We have a unique bent toward X, Y, and Z. Depending on what you're looking for, I could probably give you 3 other churches that might be a really strong fit for you. And I don't mean that in like a consumeristic way. I just mean that in a way of like, hey, your leanings, your theological leanings, your kind of your lifestyle leanings, your bent, you might be better suited over here at this Baptist church or whatever, right? And so I think that we can even extrapolate that further from the individual as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's really cool that, like at Courtright, we have a big involvement in food security in our city, but there are other churches where they have a much larger focus on like meeting housing needs, or churches that are downtown and are kind of involved in our downtown core are going to have different roles in meeting the needs of our city. And
right on the front lines.
It's, like there is no one church that can do all of it. And so it's okay and it's good that we kind of, divide and tackle. I don't want to say conquer. That feels like the wrong word. But
I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
Say, okay, this is what God has made our group of people passionate about. But we also want to work together. Like we want to have good relationships with the other ministries in our city so that people's needs can be met and they can be healed and they can encounter Jesus in the ways that they need to encounter Jesus.
Yeah. God meets us all in different ways. And that's true for those of us who are already followers of Jesus, but also for those who are not, being in a downtown ministry context and working with marginalized people, that brings a unique set of skills that not every church is equipped to do well, right?
No.
And then also the spiritual and physical needs present are so different, right?
Yeah.
And so there is, but God meets people in a very profound way in those places. So yeah, like I think that the broader point that I'm thinking about when it comes to this whole idea of, dusting your feet off if someone rejects the gospel or whatever is that like, yes to boundaries, yes to, being kind and gracious above all else and saying, I've done what I can do. I leave this with God. And also recognizing that we are not the whole picture for that individual, that God may be at work in their life in the weeks and years and decades ahead, right? So anything else from the passage that's worth jumping into a little bit?
I think we kind of covered the bulk of it.
Like, I guess we didn't really get into too much with Herod and all that.
It feels hard to without speculating.
Sure.
Like what were his intentions?
Yeah.
Why did he want to see Jesus?
Well, I mean, I think based on the fact that he beheaded John or was responsible for the beheading of John, I think we can at least say that his intentions were not good. That he was probably concerned, to put it lightly, about.
He was perplexed.
Perplexed, which is a great word. I don't think I looked that up, the Greek on that one. I probably should have, because I'm curious. Maybe I'll do that later. But yeah, like there is something interesting with this little aside, and just I think it's worth exploring, with when it comes to our church, when it comes to how we approach our faith, how we approach what we're doing, who's taking notice?
Yeah.
And I say that in both a good and bad way. Like, who's taking notice of if we're really not being kingdom minded in our approach to whatever, insert whatever matter you could imagine. People are going to take notice.
Yeah.
Right. And hopefully the inverse is true, that if we're doing, good work, if we are making a difference spiritually, physically, in our region, who's taking notice? One of the really sobering questions that a previous church that I worked at often asked, which I think was a great question, is if we closed tomorrow, who would be impacted? Who would even notice?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well,
we'll leave you with that one.
Yeah.
Ponder it.
And I mean, like, that's worth considering, not just as a church, but also for you as an individual. If you left your house, if you left your neighborhood, what impact would be felt? And so maybe that's a question to mull over with your family, with your friends, and wherever you find yourself this week, whether you are vacationing or whether you are here in Guelph with us, or whether maybe you're just stumbling across this in some other corner of the world or universe. I guess not universe, because that would be, oh boy.
Yeah, if you're from Mars, let us know.
Yeah. Perfect. Fantastic. So wherever you find yourself, on Earth or not, we hope that you have a wonderful week, and we'll catch you next time.